Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's PermaTalks. The PermaTalks are brought to you by Viktor Borusmäki and the European Permaculture Network. And today our guest is Anne Stobart, and she will talk about medicinal plants in the food forest. Anne actually sent in her lecture 2 years ago, and we couldn't have her in the last year's PermaTalks because we were already full. So I promised her that in this year's she will be in. So welcome, Anne Stobart. I hand over to you. All the best.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share, I've got about 25, 26 slides, and let me just click them up. I'll talk through. Look, I can talk for a long time, but I aim to talk for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we hopefully have plenty of time for questions. So, share screen options, share. Okay. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, cool. So I'm glad to be here. I'm a medical herbalist, retired from practice now, but I wanted to talk about designing with medicinal trees and shrubs. I really talking about the medicinal forest garden and what I mean by that. So I'm going to outline the herbal medicine context and the range of trees that can be included in a medicinal forest garden design, a little bit about my background as a clinical herbal practitioner, why sustainability is important in that context. As I'm sure everybody would agree, the forest garden offers plenty of foods for health, and many of those foods are also medicinal. So, but here what I want to think about is not just what trees or other plants might be useful, but also some ethical and issues of safety in offering herbal treatment, quality in harvesting, and using these plants. So, and also a range of design purposes. I think it's important to be aware there may be all sorts of different purposes, plus also further resources. So really, I want this sort of presentation to be of value to designers, new or very experienced. So first of all, thinking about the context of herbal medicine and particularly how herbal medicine operates in Western herbal medicine, particularly is my expertise, and thinking about herbs as a resource that the planet offers us and how I might be using them. So the worldwide use of plants is well known to be extremely important if you look at information from the World Health Organization and so on. And Western herbal medicine, as opposed to the traditions of Asian, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic and Indian medicine, is a kind of a strange mixture of classical Greek or Mediterranean medicine, plus some Northern Europe contributions, plus some folklore, plus a big chunk of North American herbal use. But it also dovetails with current medical understanding. And in the UK, obviously things vary from country to country, but in the UK, most herbal practitioners that are professionally trained will offer a consultation of at least an hour's length, getting a full case history. This is the herb garden at Middlesex University, where I used to run the professional practitioner herbal medicine program. And the program included a whole range of sciences, materia medica, pharmacy, herbal pharmacy, and medical sciences, clinical sciences, right up to differential diagnosis. So the students did a 3-year program in those kind of botanical and medical sciences, plus they also did a 1-year clinical training course. So by the end of that, they had done something like 500 hours of practice with a patient. Now, some people might be interested in telling others where you can get that sort of information about those kinds of courses. And there are a few universities still offering them in the UK. And I'll provide a link if anybody's interested to a Herbal Reality website where there's a list of courses. But probably what's more important right now is plants and the planet, because the sustainability of herbal supplies is quite an issue. Many people buy over-the-counter herbs. Lots of people ask me about what herb is good for this, that, and the other, rather than taking a holistic approach. And so people will go straight into a health food shop or a chemist to try to obtain some of these plants. This is one of the very rarest. This is golden seal, Hydrastis canadensis, and it's the yellow roots that are of value. They're found in North American forests as a ground cover plant alongside ginseng, which is also extremely valuable. And they've both been so over harvested that they're now on the CITES lists, and the export of them is highly regulated under CITES licenses. And as climate breaks down, it's likely that more and more plants will be affected, not least because most wild harvesting of commercial sources takes place in forested areas. So it's really important to take the approach that we can domestically cultivate medicinal plants and take the pressure off the environment, as well as fighting to save the environment. The additional benefit of that is also that we can manage quality better. And there are lots of problems at the moment with imports of supplies, even organic accredited supplies, because they're often polluted or adulterated in some way. And United Plant Savers in North America is quite a good source for suggestions about dealing with plant supplies sustainably, but we don't have time to talk about that right now. So again, that's another link I can provide if there's interest. But briefly about me, I suppose I was trained originally in sciences, but I was always interested in plants, and it never occurred to me that I could train as a herbal practitioner until I discovered a course that was run by the National Institute of Medical Herbalists in the UK. And at that time, it was a 4-year correspondence course, but that syllabus became the university program. And I didn't hesitate, I was in. But once I'd qualified, I realized that I was using a lot of plants that were being imported, and I wanted to grow them myself. So here I am standing gleefully holding onto I think it's a crampbark tree, Viburnum opulus in Holtwood, which was which I'll say more about, which was a medicinal forest garden that we developed in Devon. One of the things that I did do was to travel to North America when I took retirement from Middlesex University, and I spent 6 weeks there on a placement, absolutely living in heaven in a renovated forest area run by the United Plant Savers, and that's what this image is about. It's one of their kind of symbolic pictures. They managed to bring together quite a few landowners with quite big patches and start to allow the plants to regenerate after years and years of strip mining. So as a result of that, I was able to produce a couple of books. And the first one was this one, the Medicinal Forest Garden Handbook. And that brings together the experience from North America and growing the medicinal forest garden between 2005 and 2020. So in the book, I talk about different purposes that people might have for wanting to have a medicinal forest garden, or if you like, medicinals in a forest garden. And so that these can vary considerably from self-help to kind of ornament and interest in history and wildlife and diversity, right through to this kind of situation, which is more of a commercial option and perhaps less of a forest garden and more of a field growing setup. So traditionally, herb gardens, like the one above, these knot gardens, are very two-dimensional, and so people don't think of trees and shrubs particularly when they think of herb gardens, which is a shame, because as we will see, there's an awful lot that you can do. And then this one here is part of the Holtwood Medicinal Forest Garden in Devon. There is also the possibility of a community garden with medicinal plants, and the community green that I'm currently involved with near to Exeter, where I live, is Sanford Community Green, and it consists both of a traditional herb garden, which you can see in the image, and also a forest garden alongside, which I was involved in designing. And we maintain that on a regular basis, and it's much appreciated by the local community. So in view, you can see probably towards the back willow and elder and others, and then closer in there'll be things like meadowsweet, and right up front a raised bed with good drainage, because in Devon we have so much wet, with oregano and southernwood, and over to the left are mints, and another bed waiting to be infilled. So there's lots of possibilities to make a very attractive and community based site. So my view is that transformative design can create something magical, and we did this with Holtwood in Devon in 2005. We purchased 2.5 acres on the left of Sitka spruce and about 1,000 trees altogether, about 30 or 40 years old, and we transformed it over a 15-year period. It's actually was sold in the pandemic, but the middle image shows the planting, which was very much in rows, because the furrows and ridges help to control water. And then to the right, you can see the beginnings of the more mature woodland with pathways through, lots of different plants in different areas. So instead of a monoculture of Sitka spruce, we planted what was something of a permaculture design. I had done permaculture training a few years before, and this is where all the ideas came from. And I wanted to include a number of things. I wanted to be able to propagate my own plants, maybe sell some. I wanted to harvest and dry and store plants and make all sorts of things. So as we went along, there were a lot of changes, and I'll talk a bit more about that. This is the back of the envelope design that dates back to 2004, and you can see the nature of the site is very square, but it actually slopes downhill. This is rather a sketch. It slopes downhill to a field adjoining the River Torridge in North Devon. And so we actually had an amazing variety of soils. We were able to benefit from damp and quite rich soil where it had lots and lots of leaf fall and other mulching. There was a stony slope with poor soils, and then there was there were upper areas that were low in nitrogen, not so low in calcium, surprisingly. And the plan was to build a forest garden set up around squares, which would give plenty of light around the edges. But you can also see big mistakes in my design. For example, if this is the entrance here, it doesn't make any sense to put a dryer here. So we learned as we went along. We introduced a number of things: storage space, gate fencing to stop deer getting in, and a large pond, and a small shaded propagating nursery. So it actually started out like this. with some heavy duty clearance of very well grown Sitka spruce, we were able to get some fairly light footed forestry contractors in, which was great. And we ended up, this is a winter view from a drone, and you can see the entrance area is to the top here. We started to grow beds in the open. We had wood store, loo, pond, propagating area, small forest garden for visitors, and then beyond all the ridges and furrows with all the variety of trees planted. And to give you an idea of what we harvested, these are these are all Latin names, but we harvested a lot of ground plants like yarrow and mallow and angelica, burdock, but we also had lots and lots of shrubs and trees, including walnut, juniper, and thuya, some conifers. Vaccinium, the blueberries, grow well in fairly acidic soil where we were. Rose and raspberry and so on, the usual kind of mix, but also quite a lot of interesting introduced plants. For example, prickly ash, the American version, which grows a bit like a gooseberry, but really prefers a more calcified type of soil. Chasteberry, which is quite a traditional historic plant with hormonal uses, grows in the Mediterranean. So we were able to extend the range of plants. In terms of herbal medicine, if you use only the UK native plants, it can be fairly limiting. So thinking about design very much depends on purpose, obviously. Is it self-help? Is it practitioner use, training in ID, and so on? But there are some issues that I think are quite important. And first one is toxicity, because some plants are pretty toxic, either because they're medicinal and you can overdose if you're not careful, or because they shouldn't be used at all, really. For example, ferns used to be used in the old days. They grow really well in shady areas, but in the old days they were used for treating worms, digestive worms, because they're pretty toxic. So they would knock out the worms, make people feel quite ill, but help to remove them in that way. Not a good idea. It's easy to overdose. And in fact, most fern roots are restricted and can only be sold through a pharmacy. And then, of course, there is this plant, which is the yew, Taxus baccata, which, if you look online, you'll be told it is toxic, full stop. Actually, it's the seeds that are toxic. And so one of the problems about toxicity is knowing which parts of plants are safe to use and in what situations. And a medical herbalist will have lots of monographs which give them dosage recommendations and so on. But some plants really are best left alone, and some plants need visitors to be educated. The red berries of yew may be edible, but the problem is the seeds they contain. So my view is that unless you can offer some education in the context of the medicinal forest garden, such as signposting or teaching people how to identify plants, then it's better to avoid some of the more toxic plants. And herbal medicine is generally thought to be less harsh, so that seems to fit. The second ethical issue really is if somebody asks you which plant is good for, say, a headache, you need to be very careful, because there are red flags. Persistent cough, headache is always difficult to identify the source without some medical training. And there are other complaints that people might think are simple to cure symptomatically, which may be better off being seen by somebody who knows what they're doing. So I always say to people, I think it's probably better to have a consultation with somebody who's medically trained if something continues to be a problem, or if I know that they're on orthodox medication, prescription medication. There are also some issues about claims to cure, and there are legal restrictions. For example, I'm not allowed to claim to cure cancer. Nobody is, unless they are on a medical practitioner listing. Whether that's right or wrong, it's important to know because it may affect, for example, insurance. So all of these three issues, which I think are questions that need to be addressed if you include medicinal plants, can be helped through education, particularly plant identification and suggestions about safe use. So I'm very much in favour of offering training. In fact, I'm working on a free course to try and encourage more people to take up more training. Hopefully it'll be ready by the end of the month. I'll be able to send links out. So anyway, I'm rabbiting on. Let me talk about some trees and shrubs that would be wonderful to include in a medicinal forest garden, or any forest garden that you would like. And I think it's quite good to think of families because they often contain similar constituents. So I'm going to talk about herbal actions that are useful in quite a few different situations. Anti-inflammatory herbs, helpful in pain due to all kinds of joint and muscle problems. Antiseptic herbs, particularly the aromatics and the myrtle family. Anxiolytic means dissolving anxiety, so it's referring to a sedative. Many of the rose family can offer that, and hawthorn is one of those. Bitter herbs are really useful for getting the digestion moving, supporting the liver, and the barberry family are renowned. Soothing demulcent herbs, which are very much helped by the mallow family, including lime flower in the mallow family. And then the diaphoretic herbs, which help people to sweat or to eliminate from the body, eliminate toxins and other problems. And that's the Caprifoliaceae, or the honeysuckle group, the elderberries, which has now been renamed the Adoxaceae. So let's just have a look at some of them. In alphabetical order of Latin name, barberry. And the barberry is a brilliant plant. Unfortunately, it's pretty much been removed from the countryside because it was thought to carry, or it did carry, a fungal rust which affected wheat. So it's not so commonly seen, but it produces bitter berries which can be made into a jelly, and the leaves and flowers can be dried for an excellent tonic for the digestive tract. And this is one, it's related to the Oregon grape, Berberis aquifolium. Some people know it as Mahonia, which many herbal practitioners used as a skin complaint tincture. His hawthorn, which is very well researched actually. There's a lot of evidence that it does support the circulation. It helps support heart muscle, and it has a beneficial effect on blood pressure. It's so effective that I always put a warning with it because it shouldn't be taken alongside blood pressure medication, because the additive effects may be a bit disastrous in making blood pressure too low. But hawthorn berries can be used to make a wonderful tincture, or indeed a liqueur. Take a few teaspoons a day for beneficial for the circulation and the heart. And here's hibiscus, which in more exotic Mediterranean contexts can be used as a hedge plant. It actually can be pruned really well. Perhaps needs more shelter in more northern climates, but this can be used in tea. The flowers are excellent, but the leaves also can help to moderate blood fats. So many of these plants can be used to provide a more healthy lifestyle. I mentioned myrtle, which is in fact the same family as eucalyptus. So a lot of aromatics here. Myrtle does really well, again, in a sheltered site. And as climate changes, we may see things like myrtle and hibiscus creeping north. So it's the essential oils that provide the antiseptic activity. And this is an evergreen plant. The berries also, if it's doing well, although it's not native in UK, in my area, it will produce seed, which can also be used because they're edible. And this is a European willow, a purple willow. It's probably used quite a lot for basketry and such like. The dark bark tells us that it's high in salicins or salicylates, and they interfere with the inflammatory process in the body. Not the same as aspirin. I've written about the difference. But this is a perfect example of how pollarding can work really well in the forest garden context. And these stems will last a couple of years, then they need to be taken off or they'll start to dominate the plant. But the purple willow and the violet willow are less vigorous than the white willow, so probably more active in terms of pain relief. So this is another great family, but there are lots of other willows that can be used. And I mentioned at the start the elder family. Again, the flowers and the berries are often used in cold relief. And this is likely to be one to consider for commercial use because there's quite a big demand. It's one of the top demand plants in North America in terms of sales of elderberry syrup and related products. So, and there is research that shows, for example, the elder can be used, the elderberry. It's useful in many respiratory complaints and can help to reduce symptoms. So I mentioned about coppicing and also pollarding. Bark is a wonderful product from the forest garden and probably undervalued in the herbal community, let alone further afield. And here we have from left to right, cramp bark, which is a excellent antispasmodic. What will be done with this particular these stems is that the bark can be scraped off with a sharp knife. At this time of year, when the leaves are starting to appear, the bark gets easier to take off. And then the next one is cherry, which also has some antispasmodic action, is often used in cough syrups. The third one along from the left is buckthorn, which has a laxative action, the bark, and very useful for constipation, but only for stimulating change. Not so good if people are very anxious and already very tense. And then the last one is ash. Ash bark is anti-inflammatory. It's so effective. It used to be considered as an alternative for fevers to the South American bark, cinchona, that was imported and used for treating malarial problems. So just to round up, I've talked a bit about design. 3 top tips. So design and harvest and produce. Design really benefits if you have variation in your environment. So when people say that they've got a field to plant, I think to myself, oh, because as we know in permaculture, you actually can do a lot more if you can vary. You can provide hedges, you can dig out ponds, you can have water management, hugelculture, all sorts of different environments. And so here's some examples. The willow obviously loves water. Crampbark also likes a moist site and acidity. Poor soil is excellent, but provided there is sun and shelter for many aromatics. So looking for variety in a growing site, I think is quite an important thing. And then I've mentioned coppicing. I think the value of coppicing is underrated, so much so that there's not that much information around about what you can coppice and when and how. Many plants, for example, the elder, can be grown on a 3-year coppice cycle. You need a year for the plant to start flowering again. Then it will flower and fruit for 2 more years. And the same is true of hawthorn, so that, for example, hawthorn hedges could be cut on alternate sides to provide a continuing harvest. The other thing about coppice is you get incredibly lush foliage, and so, for example, lime produces wonderful leaf matter, which can be used for all sorts of purposes, including medicinal teas. And coppicing gives fresh bark, as I showed before. We wouldn't use this old bark here, but this lovely purple bark will be ideal for harvesting and drying. And the third tip in design, apart from varied environments and coppicing, is the drying issue. Most people don't really think about this until later, and I think it's quite a useful thing to be aware of, that if you're going to preserve plants, they need to be dried, and to dry well, you need not so much warmth, but air. This is an example of good drying with preservation of colour. This is also well dried, but it's bark, and you wouldn't expect it to be anything much but strips of brown. And in fact, if you don't label it, you won't know what it is by the time it's dry. So a good tip is to label with date, plant name and part, and any other information that might be needed later on. Otherwise, this only becomes good for the compost heap. So just to mention a few more resources, and I'm very happy to discuss all of these things in a moment. I've been writing most recently, in the last 15 months or so, I've been writing a medicinal tree woman newsletter on Substack. I think it's probably worth looking at if people are interested in recipes and examples of trees and gardens. There's also another book that was published a year ago or so, and that the first book has 40 profiles of trees and shrubs in it, with some cultivation information and use information. And this second book has those 40 profiles rewritten and another 40 profiles, so it's got 80 altogether, plus a recipe for each profile to encourage people to start using the plants. There's also some courses online, one for design, one for harvest and making, and one about the chemical constituents and how they work. And you can access those through my website, the Medicinal Forest Garden Trust website, which I maintain, and hopefully have a look, see if there's anything that will interest you. Thanks for watching.
Okay, thank you, Anne, for that presentation. Lovely. Anyone, questions? Now would be the time. Hands up. Oh, yes, Steve, please.
Yeah, sorry I came in late, but one of the areas that I do a lot of work with is planting trees through pastoral farms for browse. And you know, I'm just wondering, I always wonder what is the medicinal characteristics that are transferred through cows from browsing on such plants, and I wonder if it's very similar to the effect that we receive as humans.
Do you mean in terms of treating the cows or in terms of their products treating the
Well,
humans?
I always say that cows are very intelligent animals, and I say to the farmers to, when they move them into new paddocks, to actually watch them. What do they what attracts them to eat first of all? And I say to them, you know, they move into a new paddock, and the first thing that they look for is the lollies, the sweet new grasses, and then they look around. After that, they look around for what's going to give them their medicine or their mineral content. And invariably in modern pastoral farming, none of that exists because people don't plant trees uh, anymore for stock to browse on. But I say that cows are actually very intelligent, and they know what they need and what they want for their mineral and their medicine. And of course, as you have pointed out, Anne, there's a huge range of trees with considerable amount of medicinal character and quality. And I reckon cows know, they know what they need.
Yes, maybe they smell it out as well. I mean, there is, I think,
Yeah,
something in recognizing the constituents. There's quite an active sort of silvopastoral front, if you like, in the UK. There's a farm woodland forum online where sometimes people post things, and it may be that there's a bit more research coming forward now. There's certainly some evidence around a range of animals from chickens in woods right through to sheep and other livestock in terms of browsing, particularly tree forage, willow and such like. So I think people at the moment have been trying to establish some kind of limits of how much they can browse and how much effects these things have.
if you any links to that network?
Well, the Organic Research Centre in the UK,
Yeah, yeah.
they have a number of individuals who are interested in animal tree fodder. So that would be my starting point.
Yeah, I'm an active member of that entity. They're brilliant. They're great.
Yeah,
Yeah, and growing and growing and growing by the day.
which is good.
Yeah,
And is this the Farm Woodland Forum, what you mentioned?
Yeah, the Farm Woodland Forum sometimes has people posting. I think there's probably a bit of overlap as well.
Okay. Is this the Agroforestry AC UK website? Just to
Yeah.
make okay, yeah. Then the link's in. So Steve, check the link, please. Okay. Any more questions? Yes, Karen. Hello. Welcome.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for a really informative talk. I've got a question for you. We live in North Brittany, so a very similar climate to Devon side. And in my front garden, that's about 250 square meters. I created a herb wheel, which I kind of divided into 4 quadrants. One of them kitchen garden herbs, and then there's 3 others. And I never really thought about including trees and shrubs within that space. But I have started planting like fruit trees on the outer perimeter. Is there anything that you could recommend that is not too huge that I could kind of coppice or plant, kind of shrubbery like medicinal herb that I could incorporate in such a design?
So is this a sunny spot?
It is a very sunny spot, yes.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Well, aromatics, definitely. I mean, the thing about herb gardens, you have to keep harvesting them or they lose their shape completely.
Yeah.
So, plants that you'd love to bring inside and just to look at or to make into tea or to dry. So, I mean, have a look at the in the books, but I suppose I would go for things like sweet bay and myrtle
Right.
and anything that's kind of prunable and aromatic.
Okay.
So, of course, there's all the Mediterranean plants, which you may already have, like
Yeah.
lavender and such like. Rosemary.
Yep.
Although, note that rosemary apparently traditionally grows big where women are in charge.
It does. It's huge.
Yeah, yeah. Well, rosemary's great to distill. So, to be honest, I would grow rosemary where I could have a row or a hedge rather than just a one single plant.
I've got it's kind of forming a border on the outer perimeter of one of the beds. So it's kind of like
All right.
it's like a hedgerow at the moment. So
Oh.
yeah, just thinking I could actually kind of one of the quadrants I could actually plant some shrubby things. So you're thinking myrtle might be an option.
Depends on the how big of the space. You might go for more dwarf versions. Most dwarf versions will have similar properties, perhaps not quite as powerful as the wild original species.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your advice.
Thank you. And then there's John. Please, John, go on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Okay. Hi. Wonderful presentation. Thanks a lot. I don't know anything about medicinal herbs or anything, so but I'd be interested to know about the combinations of plants, like a guild, like especially with fruit tree, because I'm sort of managing a food forest with a lot of plum trees and apple trees and pear trees and I don't know if there's any like particular medicinal herbs that go well in combination with fruit trees. It's maybe a difficult question, so I understand there's not much of an answer, but
Having spent much time strimming under fruit trees, yeah, no, I mean it's quite interesting because you can fill the space between fruit trees, whether it affects the productivity or not, with a lot of the medicinal sort of shrubs and herbs, and right from strawberry ground cover up to more substantial plants that we were just talking about. And it's wonderful to see in well-established forest gardens that you can do that. You can fill the space. My problem is always with medicinal plants is that you need to also be able to harvest them, and they need light. It's a bit like a coppice situation. So growing in alleys is certainly a way forward, I think, because then you can actually plant your herbs and expect to get a decent crop. But growing under a sort of scattered orchard where there's not much light between trees or not much space, it may be somewhat problematic. But I suppose there's also, it's worth thinking about the fruiting shrubs like raspberries, gooseberries, blackcurrants, which will do reasonably okay. And there's lots of kind of in-betweens, jostaberries and all those. And many of those fruiting shrubs have leaf which can be harvested and dried for teas. Because they're prunus, they're mostly astringent, which is great. So I suppose I would kind of go for low ground and shrubby mix, if that makes sense, depending on the space.
yeah, no, thanks. That's a good comment.
But I think orchards are such a fantastic resource, and it would be great if I could come up with a few, you mentioned guilds, but a few combinations that might work well. And I am looking at that more closely. So far, I've mostly produced guilds related to particular complaints. So women's complaints, for example. I think one of my recent posts on Substack includes that one.
Yeah, if I may add, John, there's quite a lot of work over recent years on permaculture orchards being the label. I think it was a Canadian guy, and it may be you go online and just do a search permaculture orchard. But my work, I push very hard the underplanting, the of herbs into orchards, like comfrey is the major one, and horseradish, and a lot of the other conventional radishes, also chicory and fennel and dill. A lot of those plants, they're all medicinal, and they have a tremendous benefit for the trees. Chicory and comfrey and horseradish, especially because they're very deep rooted, and they grow the richness of the soil.
It's a great suggestion, horseradish particularly, because there's not many in northern kind of Europe. There's not that many hot herbs, and horseradish is one of the few.
Yeah.
And
There's
if you
a lot
can
of
get
that in Finland.
yeah, if you can get the daikon radish, which is a big white radish, it grows, some of it, if in a healthy condition, will grow 3 feet long.
Yeah, wow, great.
Okay. Anyone? A question?
Can I go again?
Yeah, but yes, of course, please. Go
Of course.
The other thing is about neuropathy. So things, are there any herbs that are particularly good for like neuropathy or
neuropathy? Yeah.
Neuropathy.
So traditionally,
I've heard green tree extract. I've heard that one.
Oh, green tree extract, right. Neuropathy in the limbs. So you're talking about something like numbness or loss of feeling?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, red flag. Some neuropathies are possibly down to things like diabetes and the like. So, so a pinch of salt here. That I would always suggest somebody got themselves checked out. But there are, I mean, for example, there are a few plants that are particularly noted for the benefits for the nerve endings. And the one that I would immediately think of is St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum. Is one of the ones that you can infuse. You infuse the flowers in oil. Late summer, they get produced in profusion, and they're infused in usually olive oil, could be any oil. And then you could poultice the herb, or you could infuse it in the oil and apply either direct. And so it has traditional benefits for skin lesions or problems like shingles, which is inflammation of the nerves.
All right.
So that would be a starting point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would get it checked out.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, then we are going to close.
I think there's one question I've just spotted. What plant could you not do without? All right, I'm going to make a plea for a particular plant that might surprise people, and that's alder buckthorn. It's a small European tree, which some people rather hostile to. They think it's invasive. I think it's the most amazing tree, because it not only does it offer us a laxative bark to help clear the body of toxins, but it offers all through the summer tiny flowers that support a host of pollinators. So it's the most incredible bee food. And a lot of the medicinal plants, because they're native species or species with flowers carrying nectar and pollen, they're good for pollinators. So although if I was on a desert island, I might say something like lavender or rosemary, I think I want to make a bid for the alder buckthorn. The Latin name is Frangula ulmus. It's a brilliant little tree.
Can you put that in the chat, please?
I can,
And
yes.
it's not to be confused with sea buckthorn, is it?
No, they're different families. Sea buckthorn, pretty good, but you need a lot of light. It won't do very well in any kind of shade, and it has brilliant fruit. which are full of vitamin C. So it's definitely a good one. Actually, it is very hard to choose. I think I could probably get down to my 20 or 30 favorite plants.
Oh, I'll write them all down.
They're in my book. I grew them all.
Okay, so we have to get your book. No worries.
Sorry about that. Yep.
Yeah.
You can get a signed author copy from my website, Medicinal Forest Garden website. And but what I'm hoping to do is try and get it into some libraries. Just as a sort of final word from me, the first book is fully referenced. So it's great for students because they can follow up lots of references. The second book, there was not space for the references, so they are free to download on the website, Medicinal Forest Garden Trust website. But a word of caution, they're all clinical medicine references and there are 500 of them, 40 pages, so not exactly bedtime reading, but they are available free.
Oh, Manya, you have a question?
Hello, thank you, Anne. It was wonderful. You know, I'm coming from Greece. I have a teacher in herb medicalism who studied in England. Maybe you know her. I don't know, Konstantina Litsa. But I
Not
just
very
want...
good at names and faces, so
Okay. I just have noticed, maybe it's one opinion, that in old ladies' garden here in Greece, I see mostly medicinal plants. And I think that maybe this came from past times where women had in their gardens just medicinal plants, beautiful also, but I don't know if it's just my idea or what do you think?
I think people did learn by trial and error. I think they suffered a lot of pain and illness that they couldn't do much about, but they also learned by trial and error, particularly things that could be used on the skin, things that were soothing. So for particular kinds of complaints. And in fact, my first book, before the others, was about 17th century household medicine. That was my research thesis about families in the southwest of England and whether or not they collected recipes and whether or not they used them, which has some surprising findings about whether or not they used them. But yes, I agree with you. I think a lot was learned from experience, but not necessarily enough to stop disease, but mostly to
Prevent.
soothe it, which
Yeah.
is why many of the remedies were thought to be soothing. The other problem being that people thought disease had to be expelled from the body. So there were a lot of people using anti-constipation remedies, laxatives and such like in the past.
Yeah.
Might do some good today, you know. I can think of a few people who could do. But anyway,
Thank you.
but that's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to thank you, Anne, for your presentation. You have a lovely voice. I could listen to you for hours.
You're very welcome.
Next week's PermaTalks is with Kalin Radulescu. So we will hear for him about permaculture on the edge, permaculture storytelling. So let's see what that is. You're invited to stay for a little bit longer. I will now stop the recording. So thank you, everyone.